I got to set everybody straight here. In the actual documentation, it's referring to Hex. It's not referring to Pulsechain in terms of the recycling. So it's very important that we have that context. And it's also very important to have the context of what was happening back then with the distribution model that Richard Hart was using. And I think that's where I can kind of play a pretty strong part here. So Richard had something called the adoption amplifier. And this is very misunderstood and not well known amongst the community. And what he basically did was he used the adoption amplifier to divvy out tokens for a 352-day period. Okay. On top of that, now what the adoption amplifier was is you give ETH to the adoption amplifier, it's going to kick you back Hex. All right. There's actually a price kind of attached with that in a way. But the other issue here was there was also liquidity on Uniswap back then. And what Richard was trying to do, I think, I'm not in the man's head, I can't speak for him, but I think he was trying to find a way to distribute this fairly so it could not be gobbled up by a bunch of by a bunch of whales. So what he was doing was allowing people to come in every single day. He divvied out 1 billion tokens for 352 days. And he allowed people to come in and make purchases, okay? Now, what was happening was whales were actually going on the Uniswap side with liquidity pools, and they were arbitraging the AA against Uniswap liquidity pools. So what you're having is, the SEC is saying that Richard Hart was the person who was circulating this in and out, when actually it was Richard Hart being a market maker, matching the price of Uniswap at the end of every day, and then people taking those arbitrage events and dumping them back into the AA. So that's extremely important context and I'm sorry I had to interrupt you guys, but I wanted you guys to know that.
To add to these points, what people like to say is that especially when they use the word misappropriation of funds, I saw that inside the SEC document. Hex, again, if we speak specifically to Hex launched complete. There was never a appropriation of funds necessary because the capitalist in this system, the founder, had already developed that product complete. There was no future expectation of new add-ons, features, partnerships with exchanges, referral links. None of that stuff was ever marketed or told by Richard to the community before the product actually went live December 2nd, I believe, of 2019. So when the community gathered around this YouTuber talking about Bitcoin, everybody loves the guy because he's talking about their bags of Bitcoin. And when he destroyed people over products like IOTA, or even when he was very anti, Ethereum, saying that it didn't have enough, history basically to have a Lindy effect, right? That this was a new risk in a system of cryptocurrencies, and he was a cyber hornet when it came to his Bitcoin bags back then. The history led to Richard creating a product of his own capital, intellect, volunteerism from people that ran simulations, provided math, basically, Solidity code and things like that. And then he published it publicly. It's always been available if you just go to Etherscan and you look at the contract. So anybody that chooses to say, hey, this was misappropriation of funds, they simply have not done any research whatsoever, specifically with the product of Hex.
And I'll point out one last thing here. The SEC makes the argument that this was done to create a false impression of significant trading volume. And I want to point out, if you've ever listened to Richard, he has always accepted the fact that there is not high trading volume, especially in the early days, based on the amount of people who were, back then staking or mining. So I find it very interesting that they used that argument, because Richard has never ever said or mentioned that Hex had high trading volume for those reasons to attract investors. That's never been something that I've heard.
But does it matter? I'm asking this genuinely because I haven't watched these videos, but does it actually matter what he said if the on-chain evidence is otherwise?
Yeah, it doesn't. So that's a good point, and that's a very genuine question. But my point here is that I don't think that there was. And the other point was, that's one of their primary arguments. And if that's one of their primary arguments, the blockchain will tell the truth there.
Right. that makes perfect sense.
First of all, the accusation levied against him under the law and you can call it, money laundering, you can call it wash trading. Essentially, they're accusing him of being on both sides of the trade and creating a market where he was both the buyer, the seller, and the beneficial owner of the transaction. I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm not
But
sure.
David, by the way, I don't want to interrupt, but that is literally what market makers do for a living.
Yes, but market
I'm not
makers
saying
are
that market makers on their own project, but I am saying that I mean, what you just described is what a market maker,
But the market
which is
maker,
legal,
but no,
does.
but the market maker does it when it's listed. In this case, I think they're talking about the private round. So she shows the raise. Well, that's understood. But
I'm not defending
No,
it.
I know.
I'm just pointing out that a market maker's literal job is to
but
provide
David,
liquidity on both sides of a trade.
Are they referring to the private sale or the public after it's listed, or both?
It was listed.
There was nothing
It was
private
listed.
about it. That's the
There
whole
was both.
point.
Yeah,
The
it
whole
was
point is if you
always
guys are
public.
talking about cryptocurrency and you're saying that you have freedom to transact, without KYC, if you have Ethereum in your wallet from 10 years, 7 years ago from the launch, which there are whales inside of the Hex ecosystem that have 300,000-400,000 ETH. And billions of dollars worth of crypto value basically as well locked away in their wallets. We can see these things on chain. The whole benefit of public blockchain is that you can have pseudo anonymity. Now, is that a feature you want to carry forward over the evolution of future cryptocurrency? It really comes down to, what are you in this for? Are you in this because the ticker goes up and price goes up? That's a lot of people. That's a majority of people, I believe. I don't think anybody volunteers time if they think that their investment of resource is going to wither. So, what is the purpose? This was always public. It was never listed. I think even listings of Hex product on central exchanges have very low volume. And that is because the culture around Richard's commentary seems to be cyberpunk. It seems to be the 10-year, 12-year ago dream of people having peer-to-peer choices about how they spend their funds. Right? It seems to be a freedom of speech kind of narrative that Richard has promoted.
Guys, so I'm just looking at this first. The more I look into this, by the way, Scott, you'll be surprised what I'm about to say. But then again, what I'm about to say is pretty worthless since I'm not a lawyer. But the more I talk about this, the more I realize that either the case is weak or it seems Richard is a few steps ahead.
I agree with that, actually, and you know that I'm not like a SEC homer by any stretch. I'm one of the most critical people of the SEC around, but I mean, there's probably something there. The question is whether it's, like you said, I mean, whether it's a technicality or something he did. But listen, if he literally took the investor funds and spent it, that's fraud. I'm sorry.
I want to jump in here. I want to say that Richard Hart is one of the smartest people that I've ever met in my life intellectually. Now, he may or may not be a scammer, and he may have not done things wrong, but one thing you can't deny is that the guy is very, 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 very smart. He's very, 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 very calculated. I think, as I said yesterday, he is the type of guy that just wants to be noticed. He just wants to be noticed and be remembered. And he hates the fact that people like Satoshi have been remembered and Vitalik have been remembered. In fact, I'm going to try to play something. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to hear it. But I want to play this for you guys just so that you can hear the interview that he did on my show. I don't know, Mari, if you've got this one, but let me just play this for you. Hopefully you guys will be able to hear it. You hear it? Give me 1 second. With him in his. Okay, so let me just play this for you guys. I asked him, why do you wear these Rolexes? Why do you shop? Why do you go flaunting your wealth? That's not the Richard Hart that I remember from when I met him in 2016 and 2017. I think this was his answer. I'll try to find it first. I find the weightlifting one. 1 second.
Oh, God, I don't know. I think Duquan has more followers.
Okay, so here's where he starts talking about
Not fair. And
hold on, let me just go a little bit back.
It is, to me, there it is, right there. Up a little bit. Right there, left. Well, yeah, left, far left. This is my personal favorite.
He's weightlifting shopping bags in this interview.
Deadlifting, that's shopping. Yeah, someone made that. The deadlifts are real. The shopping bags are actually they get pretty heavy. So life's not fair, and everyone has more followers than me. People that have stolen people's money, have bankrupted people, have been fraudulent, have been misleading, have done great harm in the world, have more followers than me. I think Duquan has more followers than me. I think 3 Hours Capital guy Suzu has more followers than me. I think a lot of scammers. This guy named Ben Baller, he said all my watches were fake. He said my SF 90,000 horsepower Ferrari is slower than a 765 LT. It's not. He says it's slower than a Senna and a quarter mile. No, it's not. This guy just says all these lies. He's got more followers than me and sells people an advisory service on how to gamble to make a secondary income. Sports gambling. Wow. What a piece of trash. So all these scumbags have more followers than me. Now, why is that? Is it because they designed better products? Nope. Is it because they got better returns? Nope. Is it because they called the top of the day? Nope. Called the watch top as well? No. And so I did everything I could that in a just and fair world would lead me to glory, that would lead me to greatness. My voice would be amplified because I was right about everything forever. But that's not how it worked out. Instead, the scumbags that are louder and more rambunctious and more controversial, they get the audience, and the good, honest person doing the honest work doesn't. And so you get rewarded for being abrasive. You get rewarded for being a prick.
And
if you're going to reward me for being a prick, I guess I'm going to have to learn to be good at it.
But what's the reward? I mean, do you measure your value? You allude to the fact that they beat you or that they got unjustly beat.
And they're still beating me.
Because more people
They still have... Yes, I'm trying to fix the world, literally all of it. If you go to my oldest YouTube videos, it's me teaching you how to give better apologies, have better relationships, drink less, work out more, do a lot of things that I found hard to do in my life, but I know tactically how to do them right if you got them.
So, I mean, that's the one video. The other video which we played today on our show, I'll play it here because I just think it's quite a funny video, but it's maybe ironic. Maybe funny is not the right word here, but listen to this.
Any of you guys from the SEC are listening, I hope you are. I want you to know from the deepest parts of your heart that I've saved a lot more people from being wrecked than you have. Because I did everything I could to prevent people from putting their money into BlockFi. Did you? I did everything I could to prevent people from putting their money into Celsius. Did you? I did everything I could to put people in charge of their own keys and get them to have self-custody. Did you do that? I called the top on the day. Did you? What have you done? So
I mean, you get the point here. Like, Richard Hart is a man on a mission to be the good guy. He's the man on a mission to make a difference and to be remembered and to get more followers and to get cred and recognition. Now, that's why I think that he's going to fight this. He's not going to take any settlements. He's going to fight this till the end, and he's going to use the money that he has to lawyer himself up and to try and beat the SEC so that he can get the same recognition that Ripple got when they beat the SEC. And I think that that's what's going to happen here. This is the type of guy you're dealing with here, and he's full of money. I mean, there is one of his wallets that is mentioned in the SEC papers, which has $700 million worth of DAI in it. He has money to fund this.
So there's a thread on, I understand all this, but there's a thread I'm going through Truth Labs. I'm trying to see how serious the allegations are and whether this will escalate to becoming criminal. So Truth Labs has a great thread, and I'm going to pin it above. Let me see if their Crypto Town Hall account is there. So if they can pin that thread up, and they break down a lot of the concerns they've had they've talked about in the months and months ago, and how they relate to this case. So for example here, and David, that goes to you before going to action, is ultimately he sets up thousands of wallets to farm Hex and Pulsechain. I highlighted in November that he withdrew over $50 million in Pulsechain sacrafice funds already at the time to his own personal accounts. And he puts out a link to a tweet the Truth Labs tweeted in November last year. About that exact allegation. And then he says, back in April, I shared a peek into who CZ personally interacted with. Richard Hart was one of those long list of frauds directly interacting with CZ's personal Binance wallets, and starts breaking down all the transactions. So it just seems that if you go through the thread, it gets a bit technical as you read through it. But the allegations of the whole, what's the word again that they've used in the recycling, it seems it seems to be the more serious one. I don't know if it becomes criminal. So I in terms of what you're saying, Ran, about his personality and why he's doing all this, he is very smart, but he might have not been able to outsmart the SEC and their resources, and might have gotten ahead of himself.
True.
Mario, can I say something about the recycling?
Please do, Model. Then we'll go to David.
So it's I mean, I created a video that I posted to this thread here that walks you through the Hex launch and origin address, and it's scripted, and I spent a lot of time kind of really thinking about what I saw back then, because it's in the past and it's really hard to kind of see here today. But I haven't seen any really Chainalysis evidence that there was recycling, right? I did see a bunch of wallets with Ethereum stacked on there, but the central point that Rags made was that the origin address was there to blunt the arbitrage opportunity for Hex in its infancy. Because if you participated in the origin address, if you participated in the adoption amplifier, you received roughly the same amount of Hex each day that you would have received if you participated in the open market. But what that turned the adoption amplifier into is basically an over-the-counter way to bid on large amounts of Hex, so that they're not, like getting slippage in a shallow market, and so at the end of the day, I would see this Ethereum come in, not to boast and brag about, oh, look, we have so much volume and we're doing it. Not that didn't happen. The Ethereum came in at the end of the day after everyone bid to bid up the amount of Hex that everyone would receive, and it would be on par with as much that you would have received if you bought that in the open market. And that's what I saw happen for 350 days during the adoption amplifier.
That's a point to be made. We like to brag, or Richard has bragged for years, about the launch of Uniswap and how the first 5 months of volume on Uniswap was dominated. More than 50% of volume on Uniswap was Hex. It was the launch phase of Hex. And it was. I recall. I don't recall that Uniswap existed. Maybe it did, but I don't think it was popular at the time that Richard was making. A lot of content around this idea of Bitcoin Hex, or how Hex would be distributed and things like that. And if you look again on Etherscan at the contract itself, a solid third of the contract is trying to make sure that Bitcoin holders could make a free claim simply by signing, that they possess Bitcoin in their wallet, right? And he made a lot of effort, content, and engagement with community, growth of community around that idea that you could participate. And I actually know a lot of people that bought Bitcoin simply to sell it the next day after they made a claim. So there was a lot of the design and development was that this launch mechanic. And what I remember is that initially there was a great arbitrage opportunity, because people would buy or get divvied out Hex with a couple of ETH, 2 or 3 ETH into the daily distribution of, I think, 500 million Hex would distribute daily. And they would buy it, and then they would put it in liquidity pool on Uniswap, and they would, either earn fees, or if they wanted to play charts, then they would arb it and make, I think that Richard got annoyed with it initially. My guess, my speculation is he got annoyed with the fact that people were eating a lot of slippage. If they went to buy on Uniswap, they might see a lower price point than the daily distribution or the previous day's distribution rates. And they may think that they could buy the same amount and not understand, slippage or low liquidity markets. So the idea that it was, misappropriation or recycling, this has already gone through basically as long as there's been smart contracts, as long as there's been, ways that people could do the same thing. EOS is the biggest example in the room. And EOS has the same truth people that just got commented about. They did the same analysis 2 years ago, that's all public, about how $4 billion was raised, and basically 800 million is speculated to have gone through the same sort of process of open market.
I want to, David Silver, are you there?
I am.
Have a look at the pinned tweet above, if you can, and everyone in the audience could also check it out. And then it's by Martin Shkreli. I don't know if it's is it the actual Martin Shkreli account, Scott? Do you know?
Apparently it is. He definitely knows something about fraud in jail.
So Martin Shkreli tweeted the following. It's part of a thread. Commented that him and Eric were going back and forth. He says the following. I'll read out what he says. Let me pin I pinned the last tweet in the whole back and forth. So it says, no Fed charges for HARP. And then Eric will responds, whether there's a parallel SDNY case we don't know about is anyone's guess at this point. I don't like to speculate too much on ex-friends going to jail. Then Shkreli goes, I'd rather no one went to jail, especially for financial crimes. But that's not the way the world works. I can't imagine the DOJ not copy-pasting this into an indictment. He'd be looking at life. And then Eric Wall says, are you sure? Please elaborate. And then Shkreli says, well, if you look at page 90 of the sentencing guidelines, I'm not sure if you've gone through that, David, which if you look up the sentencing chart, in the same PDF is recommended life sentence. So if you look at, again, page 90 of the sentencing guidelines is already at 40 plus, over 40 points. With all the victims, it's a rough situation if he gets cuffed. So essentially what Martin Shkreli is saying is looking at life in prison based on this particular point. And I've pinned that last comment, David, for you. And that's the one I really wanted to elaborate on.
Okay, so let me start with a basic here, because I want to go back to what Rand said, because, I understand why people who support Hex are going to talk like it's 2017 again, but Rand...
Well, I'm not a Hex supporter, just to be clear.
No, I was talking about people who spoke after you,
Rand is a Hex investor, a hodler.
Rand, I'm saying to the people who spoke after you, you were just talking about how he's a genius who wants to be famous and does good. Who does that sound like? And I'm going to move on from that point because I want to get to the legal side of it because you guys don't have me here for my good looks. But, when we're talking about like geniuses who want to do good things, I'm sorry, like this is like we're, the definition of crazy here. We're going to keep banging our heads. Legally, with the SEC and what Martin's talking about, it's very, very important. I said this yesterday, and I said that I kind of was waiting for the second shoe to fall. And Mario, what you're talking about now is the second shoe. Something about this complaint doesn't ring true. And what doesn't ring true about this complaint right now is they talk a lot about Hex, but it's really focused on the actions after Hex more recently with the money and taking that. So what does the Hex tie into? And I think if you look at what Truth Labs was doing, he's showing an interconnection between other shady businesses who we all think the SEC and DOJ are investigating right now. And what this possibly can be is the tie between Binance, Uniswap, Hex. These are all $1 billion. These aren't like 12, we kept saying yesterday, come on, did he really steal $12 million and they're going to go after him for $12 million if he's worth $1 billion? It didn't make sense. I'm with Rand. I think he's going to lawyer up and have a lot of money to spend. But if for some reason this guy just turned out to think he was smarter than everyone else in the room, all of these interviews that he gave, all of these things are going to bite him in the ass with the SEC. Everything he said from a historic perspective is wrong. It's going to kill him. And he's going to be hung out to dry on the unregistered sales of security. Even Ripple agrees with that. Even the Ripple decision agrees with that. But what we're looking at right now, if you ask me, is the SEC is doing, and the DOJ, while we haven't seen the DOJ drop, we're going to see all of the interconnections. There are people who believe that, and I am not one of these, but that the cabal of crypto is tied and can be manipulated from within by large wealth. If that's true, and we can see, and Truth Labs kind of pins this in some of his tweets, all of the guys who are turning around and are interconnected in the trading, market manipulation, and these things exist, that would be a hell of a second shoe to fall. And I can see the way we're looking at this right now, that's what we're talking about.
Why isn't it in the lawsuit?
This is 4 years old. They are reactive.
Have you read the actual court documents? Because quite frankly, with all due respect, it sounds like you haven't at all. You've talked for 3 or 4 minutes, and I haven't heard anything.
Well, I'm sure you do this for a living too. Again, the court documents.
Have you read the court documents? I asked you a very simple question. I don't think you have.
Well, what I said was there's another shoe to fall. You're not listening.
Did you read the court documents? Because it sounds like you're bullshitting in front of all these people, and that's not helpful to anything that we're trying to accomplish.
That's good, though. That's why people like you can come on here and talk about how it's not a security
right, and now I'm asking you a direct question, and you're dodging it. So I'm not
100% saying yes. The whole point is you have to read what they're accusing him of.
I'm going to educate everybody in this chat about the case points since David did a bad job of it. So the first thing is Hex's staking feature. This is one of the main points. Richard Hart developed a feature called staking for Hex, which allowed investors to lock up their Hex tokens. Okay, and they also talk about the 38% return. And they were very confused about that, how that can happen, but it's mathematical and on-chain, and that can be very easily explained. The second thing that they have a problem with are the large deposits. So between December 2019 and December 2020, they say that Hart accepted, and I quote, more than 2.3 million Ether worth over 678 million. So to answer your question, that's how Hex comes into play here. It might not have been you, it might have been somebody else. The third thing, and this was actually very weak when I went over this on stream yesterday. I went through the entire court document. They talk about Richard Hart's knowledge of securities laws, and they're trying to use that to say that he had enough knowledge to be able to try to manipulate the system. And they're all tying that together. The next thing, misappropriation of funds. PART and Pulsechain allegedly misused $12.1 million of investors' funds. And that's how we tie in Pulsechain and Pulsex to this equation. So we have a timeline, Hex initially, Pulsechain, and Pulsex. And again, I'm reading straight from the court documents here, summary here. Expectations of profits. So they were saying that people had expectations of profits. And obviously this is playing into the Howey test. And then the efforts of others, and then the common enterprise thing.
Hey, Rags, really quickly.
Yeah.
And this is, I think that we all understand that we're going to, like I said, litigate this unregistered security thing with multiple projects, and nobody here is that concerned. But I mean, there's videos of him saying Hex is going to $1 million and, 40% a year interest, all these things. So,
yeah, he said based on the thing that Hex was built on, could it? You know what? Maybe not. It could go there. That's
right, but he's the founder, right? So I think the problem is that, and I'm not saying, I really don't have a judgment. I'm not deep down the rabbit hole, but like it's semantics, right? We were arguing this yesterday.
No,
are people sacrificing or are they investing? Like
it's not
it could or it would.
It's a very important point that everybody misses all the time. It's a design feature. Hex was designed to do a 10,000x.
Well, right, pumponomics. I remember. I can't imagine that the SEC loves the term pumponomics.
This is a joke. I mean, this is a joke, especially with the videos that are out there. I mean, this is a joke that you're defending this.
Did it do a 10,000x?
That's the whole point. Just because something does a 10,000x doesn't make it
your
legal.
argument is that it's a joke because he said that it's designed to do a 10,000x. Did it do a 10,000x?
My whole point is that you're not understanding that all I've said, and you're actually agreeing with me, is that there's a second shoe to fall here. The opening, and this is the civil side of this, if the criminal side is bigger than this, the whole point of what's going on right now, we all agree on this channel, we've been talking about this for days, weeks, and months, is institutional different than private sale. No one's arguing whether or not you can do a private sale, whether or not that's going to hold up. The point here is the SEC has a slam dunk on the unregistered sales. Done. We all basically agree with that. The second point is
all
whether
crypto tokens ever.
criminal.
I don't agree with that. Sorry, don't agree. Not legal, but don't agree.
Well, if you're right, then it's true for all ERC20s ever, right?
I mean, the Hex chart doesn't look that different from 99% of altcoin charts, right? And so, listen, you can say whatever you want, but it's disingenuous to pretend that just because something is down 90%, that it was necessarily a scam, because that's the entire market, which people would argue. So, like, I don't use that as evidence that it was a scam because it went up and went down. I mean, welcome to the bear market.
No, I don't think anyone was saying that. I'm saying that all the mechanics, all the market making, all the liquidity, what is it actually when you look at it under one lens or the other? It seems to me like if anything else, most people who are intellectually honest will agree that Richard Hart made efforts to comply, like to try to sneak through. I mean, I think that's his biggest problem, right? He made these legal arguments in his head,
like
convinced himself. Semantics. Yeah, he convinced himself that they're foolproof.
Right. If he in his mind said, "Hey, this is a sacrifice and not an investment," that would protect him, right?
Right. Everyone in the room knows it's an ICO, right? There's literally a price curve, and we're all supposed to say that there wasn't a sale, right? That's where I see him running into trouble.
He made the mistake of innovating without asking the SEC's permission. And in the community, we say this all the time for the past 4 years. No expectations of profit from the work of others. It's been a mantra. And if anyone who wrote this complaint would have done any research or asked literally anybody in the Hex community, they would have heard that.
Yeah, you're missing the point. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but him saying it does not make it true. Like I said, I'm not deep down this rabbit hole. I haven't heard it. But there's plenty of people who have said, I didn't launch an unregistered security who launched unregistered securities. So having it as a mantra is irrelevant if we're talking about an actual court case or legality. It's just like lawyer just said, if the SEC, one second, if the SEC views it as an ICO and everyone views it as an ICO, just the language is irrelevant. I mean, if it was launched and people invested their money, and especially if he then took that money out, and again, these are allegations, I have no facts, but if he then took that money out to buy the most expensive diamond in the world, it doesn't make a world's fuck of difference if he did it as marketing or if he did it without the proper language. That is fraud. And I'm not saying he did that, but if he did that, that is going to be fraud. So it doesn't matter if there was a mantra in the community that said, oh, by the way, guys, this is not a security offering just because we say so.
No.
By the way, I hate the fact that everything is being viewed as an unregistered security offering. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't like the SEC.
It's critical to us as Hexicans in the community that We take that to heart because we have to do all the work. Everything in Hex is built and designed and backed by the community. And that's the only way we're going to be a decentralized cryptocurrency. So it really kind of helped shape our thinking. And it came from, it was informed and instructed by the Howey test, which is why we understand that Richard Hart doesn't work for us. He's never going to work for us. And so this is how we've kind of like woken up to what the
No
Howey
offense, him
test
saying
tested.
it could go to $1 million is him working for you.
I hear that every day about Bitcoin.
He's a community participant. He's a community participant. That's a
speculate on.
Go ahead.
Yes, but you don't hear Satoshi Nakamoto saying it, Gary.
No, but I hear
it's a little
talk
different.
about it a lot. Like I hear a lot of people.
I didn't create
talking about a commodity.
I didn't create it.
That's
I didn't launch Bitcoin. I didn't launch Bitcoin. So listen, I'm not even trying to argue in principle. It's just not the same thing. It's not the same thing. He is the founder of Hex, correct? So the expectation of what he can or cannot do is different. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in here and ask the question before I start insulting people. Model, how do you feel about funding that person's lifestyle?
How do you feel about funding Elon Musk or any other person that's wealthy's lifestyle?
Elon Musk sells cars.
Okay. It's a good question. Let me take this back. So the Hex adoption amplifier was rumored to take in 1 million Ethereum, right? And so Richard Hart called the top on the day for Ethereum 2 weeks in advance. And so if he sold 1 million ETH, that's $4.6 billion. That's not the Pulsechain sacrifice. That's not the Pulsex sacrifice. And that's not the him mining full 50 Bitcoin block rewards back in 2011 or the fortune that he amassed before he retired, right? So this is his lifestyle. What you saw for that year of the bear market where he's buying all this stuff and flexing and flaunting, that was him doing outrage marketing to overcome the gatekeeping and all of the censorship, which is legendary in the crypto
Dude, that's
space.
all totally fine. I agree with you. I agree that was great marketing. The question will only be whether he did that with his own money or with user funds.
Can I finish one thing? And all of that outrage marketing just paid dividends yesterday and today and going forward because it was irrelevant that he says stay humble. That was irrelevant because he's been humble for 6 months now and not posting like that and not doing that. And he still got the SEC complaint and everyone still came out and showed pictures of him flaunting and flexing and doing all this stuff. And everyone's
Do you think the SEC cares whether you did it before or in the last 6 months? I'm sorry, man. That is completely irrelevant.
What I'm saying is I don't care. I understand the tactics and the purposes to overcome the gatekeeping and censorship that is rampant in this community because we've experienced nothing but the cold shoulder of crypto for the past 4 years. We're not listed anywhere.
Why do you think that is? And listen, I don't have even a judgment on Hex, but
here's why it is because we get to promote, market, flaunt, flex, and stunt 38% APY yield. And you can't do that anywhere. And the next level is, what's better than passive income? Paid to your cold storage wallet. What's better than that? There is nothing better than passive income. It's the whole
active income that you earned and doesn't get lost in your wallet.
That's what triggers people. They're like, where's this 38% APY? How does a coin that inflates 3.69% pay on average 38% APY? People need to look into that and understand that that's what's going on here.
Yeah, listen, I don't disagree with. I don't think that's the point.
There's something objective that you're missing. Either it's provably true that he used his own money, or he used stolen, or he used raised money to bait. No, well, look, he's smart. So if he has money of his own, I think that's not debatable. So if he used that money to go buy the world's literally almost like a caricature of what someone would buy with that money, then he either used his own money or he was baiting the SEC. I'm not saying it was a good idea, but like I said, I think he's convinced himself of some legal arguments that may or may not actually hold up in court because they're novel, and that's the risk he faces. But I highly doubt that's his money. That wasn't his money, and if it was the raised money, then he meant for it to be a bait.
Yeah, I think that like I said, I think I understand that it was a marketing tool. Great. I understand that. I understand that he is exceptionally wealthy and bought the diamond. If he made a mistake and bought that with user funds, that's highly problematic for him. That's all I'm saying. Go ahead, Action.
I agree with you, Scott. And Mod, I appreciate you going off and letting us know what the Hexicans really feel like. Because for the 6,500 people that are in here, this is going to play off really well. And let me go ahead and do the offending all the way around. At this point, unfortunately, Richard Hart is just as bad as SBF, at least with his mindset. because that altruistic mindset that everyone else sucks and I'm the only one who's going to save
No,
this
no, no.
world.
I'm gonna step in here. I'm gonna step in here and say you can't compare SBF to Richard Hart, where Richard Hart was very transparent about what he was raising money for. He told you that the money that you're sending to him is a sacrifice. He made every commitment that he made. He actually got up. He said he's going to build Pulsechain. He built Pulsechain. He said he's going to build Pulsex. He built Pulsex. Okay. Sam Bankman-Fried, on the other hand, didn't tell people what he was doing, was a liar, misappropriated user funds in his account against the terms of exchange of the agreement. You cannot compare the two. You cannot compare the two. Sorry, like, we've got to keep credibility in the spaces. We've got to make sure that people don't just come here and yap off garbage. We have to hold the spaces accountable, and to come in here and to just on a whim just say that Sam Bankman-Fried is Richard Hart is equivalent to Sam Bankman-Fried is not something that we're going to condone here. And I'm not sticking up for Richard Hart because I don't really care about Richard Hart, but I do care about people coming in here and just trying to chase clout by talking bullshit. Sorry.
No, but we don't know. So no, hold on.
Ran,
Actually, hold on. We don't know what Richard has done though, Ran. That was a great speech, but we don't know what he's done. We don't know. Like, there's a whole.
No, we do.
Hold on.
We do.
No, we don't.
We
There's
do.
a whole thread that I just pinned above that goes through very serious allegations that could all be false. But to make the statement that Richard, I'm not saying Richard is the same as Sam. I'm not saying he's different. We just don't know enough. With Sam, it's been a long time since FTX.
You cannot compare because Richard Hart delivered literally everything that he said he was going to deliver. He was transparent about it, and Sam was not.
If you've
Sam
gone through,
well,
Sam did build one of the biggest exchanges, so he did deliver something. Now, while delivering this,
Here's the difference between Richard Hart and Sam Bankman-Fried.
We can't.
Here's the difference between Richard Hart.
What is it?
The difference is everyone lost their money at FTX because FTX told them to give them their private keys. And while we, the Hexicans, earned passive interest in the next Bitcoin to our cold storage wallet through all the carnage of 2022 and the hundreds of other projects that were wrecked and lost. That's the difference. We self-custody and earn passive income.
So if you find out, but model, can I have a question, model. If we find out that Richard took a 50 million or 100 million, let's say $50 million out of Pulsechain into his own personal wallet. If you find that out and it's provable on the blockchain, I'm not saying
he told you he was going to do that. He told you he was going to do that. Mara, he literally said he's going to do that.
He said he's going to. So this you got to educate. Yeah, go ahead,
money. He said, if you give me money to this contract, you are sacrificing your money. You should expect nothing in return. We don't commit to anything, nothing. He said that. He literally said that. I remember.
It will never benefit you. The money that was sacrificed and the money that was sent to the adoption amplifier will never benefit you.
He said it's literally a sacrifice.
Okay.
He said that's literally
then I agree with you. I think that level of transparency makes no difference.
How can somebody explain to me then? There's a genuine question, no judgment, because I know people are gonna crawl up our ass. But how does that then square with saying, this thing's going to $1 million, you'll make this much money, 38% interest? How do you say, hey, we're giving 38% yield on something you'll never get money back?
But he was transparent. He was transparent about it.
It's a novel legal argument. No one's made it before. No one's given something away and said these things. So that's why I think there's risk. It's really academic.
So you gotta put it in comparison to other things you guys are all familiar with. If you're already familiar with Bitcoin and you say, I'm going to run a mining farm, I'm going to have hundreds of miners, I'm going to earn a certain percentage of the Bitcoin supply over the coming year, and then you project that out, let's say 7 years on average, and say, I'm never going to redeem my Bitcoin, I'm simply going to collect my Bitcoin. And then in 7 years, I'm going to redeem it for market value. Whatever the market is pricing Bitcoin in 7 years, that is my yield over 7 years.
That's not a sacrifice.
It's not a sacrifice. No, I'm explaining the code. I'm explaining the code and the protocol, since everyone that doesn't have hex logo gradients doesn't really get. They don't actually go look at the contract. They don't actually go to Etherscan. They don't actually ask anybody that understands math or solidity. They simply project their own bags. That's what happens in these spaces. So if you actually look at the contract itself, or maybe the hundreds of hours that Richard put out there, or thousands of hours of people that are not Richard put out there, explaining exactly how the contracts work, right? And the fact that it's all on chain. What the space is about is because people don't like Richard and his abrasive, outrage kind of personality. He holds a mirror up to the industry.
Let's move away from the personality. Like this is the part I like about him. It's just so fucking funny. But Ryan, I want to go back to the point you made. It's interesting that then how can he misappropriate funds if he said these funds?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. He said, Mario, look, there's a whole legal argument. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know how the SEC is going to hold up on this, and I don't know who's going to win. But he literally said, if you put the money into Hex, you're not investing in anything. You're sacrificing your money. In fact, with Pulsechain, some of what the contributors did was actually donate like $20 million or $30 million to a charity. It's like literally, you are giving money to a charity. You're not an investor. We're making
so my
no
question.
promises
So
to
my
any
question.
investors.
Let me go.
That's not so. It's a legal
What's the
concept. There's no
charity?
sacrifice. There's no legal concept called sacrifice. He's invented it.
There is one called donating without any
To what? No, you have to
expectation of any
donate
kind
to
of
a
return.
legitimate charity. You have to donate to a
This
charity.
is very
No, you
important.
don't have a
you can
price
donate to me
curve
and I
on
can
it.
donate to you.
Yeah, this is very important right now, and this is the importance of words, okay? Because in the documentation, the court documentation, the SEC is trying to make the assertion that Richard Hart was telling people that there was going to be, they had some sort of expectation. However, if you know Richard Hart and you've listened to his videos, the most commonly used phrase of Richard Hart is, hey, no expectations, okay? And that goes back to the Howey test. Now, I know you guys don't want to talk about that, but I do want to talk about the words that matter. Now, to answer you, Scott, I think you made a really good point, Scott. You talked about the $12.1 million, whether or not, that was for his own personal gain or marketing. Well, I will say this, it's going to be very difficult to prove in court that it wasn't for marketing, as Richard was saying that on stream quite a bit. And if that money wasn't his, it still doesn't matter, because he specifically said from the start, absolutely no expectations. And that quote, they quoted him tons in the court documentation. That quote showed up nowhere, and it's probably his #1 quote of all time. And I wonder why.
Yeah, so David, why do you think all these strategies didn't work? Like, why, if he says you should not expect anything in return, you're sacrificing that money, why then would they go after him for misappropriation of funds? Are they just trying to find something? What am I missing here? David, or what? Are you looking for more?
They haven't.
I think David's looking for more breaking. Ah, there he is.
Wait,
He is.
no, okay. So, I'm just like, thinking that, first of all, it's there, and this is like, Tezos, we said this yesterday. Tezos, you were not just buying a tote bag when you bought Tezos. I get, he said a lot of good things. And again, there's something missing from this complaint, because unlike everything else we've seen with the SEC, with the internal emails, the internal things, the videos, there are a lot of different things out there. We're still missing something here. And if this is ultimately all they have, and I said this yesterday, for a guy worth all these millions, the 12 million, he would have just simply stroked a check for $12 million, and this never would have happened. Something's missing here.
So, yeah, you said there's a second leg. So can the SEC have a second lawsuit? Can they do 2 lawsuits? I thought they'd put everything into one.
Well, no, one, they can always amend, but 2, it's the issue of, and like you said, these are all allegations of what, the interconnected, what, Truth Labs has posted. Who knows what's true and what's not? Look, it's a huge jump up to SBF. I agree that, you can't dilute when bad people do bad things. One of the things Richard did was say and come up with novel terms like the sacrifice. That's not going to win the day in court that he called it. Just because you call something, and I've been saying this for years, an ICO sounds like an IPO. It doesn't matter. A safe, when you invested in a safe, well, it's not really safe. Just because you use the right terminology and say it sometimes, once you say something wrong once, that's all the SEC needs. And then we're going to start seeing the internal documentation. It's not there yet. So that's why I think, Mario, you're having such a hard time, because you're sitting there and you're listening to a lot of people who are saying all the right things he said. It does seem superficially weaker right now. When they came out with the Coinbase and they came out with the Binance in the last couple of weeks, and what they have with Ripple, the initial punches they threw were a lot harder than the punch they threw here. And that's why I believe, because I am an old school believer, that the SEC wouldn't do something this week. They're going to have more in the future. And if they don't, then look, maybe Richard walks and gets rid of let's just assume he accidentally took the 12 million. He strokes the check, pays the penalty, and moves on. I've got to believe there's something more.
So is it common for the SEC to have 2 legs to a lawsuit?
Well, the criminal and the civil are always different. We still don't know.
So you talk about the DOJ, not the SEC again. Mainly the DOJ.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. So let's just use.
But then you'd see, but David, Binance, we saw the DOJ follow the SEC, but then the SEC had a lot more meat in it than we're seeing here. Like, this one just seems too empty for the DOJ to have anything. If that's all the SEC could have on a civil case, I don't know what's left for a criminal case.
No, the CFTC was the weak one. The SEC was stronger. We still haven't seen the DOJ in Binance.
No, I'm
So my
talking
point is,
about Richard. With Binance, the SEC had a lot of meat. With Richard, the SEC doesn't have a lot of meat. And then I just don't get, like, did you see that tweet, before anyone jumps in, that one by Shkreli? I've tweeted it above. Did you see that one about talking about page 90 of the sentencing guidelines? He's already at above 40 points.
Well, I mean, his point is he'd have to be found for each individual investment. For each investor, he'd have to be tied to that. And then his investment and his sentencing memorandum would be sky high. He's right on the technicality, but he's assuming they're proving that each individual investment was a criminal, can be held criminally liable. Then he'd be in life. But again, that's so far down the rabbit hole. We're nowhere near that yet.
Can I? Would you? If I had to make you had to make a guess, David. Two options, and you put money in it. Would you say Richard won or Richard is screwed? Which one would you put money on?
But I want to say if John Deedon was here, I would have also said he was screwed. So my gambling and investment advice sucks. I'm gonna say if those are my two options, I'm gonna go with he's screwed because there's something worse. Everything he said, the videos, they're gonna get him because we're separating out the unregistered sale of the security. So I do think he's screwed. He loses on that. But I don't see anything where he should be shaking in the boots going to jail just yet. I do think there's another punch to be thrown. I don't think we're done early in the game.
David, I appreciate that insight. I gotta say, I didn't think I was gonna, offend Rand that quickly. But to finish that point, as far as SBF goes, the difference, and this is important, the difference is that SBF partnered with governments and institutions. Richard was not looking to do that. He was looking to empower people. Like, that's the biggest difference. So their altruistic views are similar, but I'm not saying that Richard was going out and trying to scam people. That's the point that's super important here. And I'll bring it to the whole Curve thing. And the problem is that Richard's not going to get a bailout like Curve did, like that Telegram group that I was watching last night that had a lot of people in it with a lot of money in it. And just let's buy 3 million, 2 million. And money was just being tossed around to stop the bleeding. Richard doesn't have all of those friends that are willing to, get in a Telegram group and say, hey, if we spend 100 million, we're going to save, the whole ecosystem from investigation and everything else.
You can't speak to that. You can't speak to that, and I can't speak to that. You don't know who Richard's friends are. You don't know that Richard is the OA or not. You don't know what he spent, if he took a mortgage against his castle to buy a fucking diamond. You can't speculate about what he is or who he has relationships with.
Yeah, I mean, I want to come from a very non-biased perspective. Obviously, I do lean to one way, but, for those who are to the other side, I just kind of want to speak on just the kind of the business side of things. I don't think outside of the Tone Vase video, which you can go either way, I do think that it's going to be hard based off of wallets, based off of the way Richard Hart speaks, based off of how he does things. It's going to be extremely hard to prove that person or that entity that is using that hex, using that Ethereum is him. So that's the first thing. If someone knows who it is, that's an argument. But is it them? Without a doubt, that's going to be hard to prove. The second thing I would always like to bring up that should be in discussion is prior history in this space. For example, EOS. EOS raised $4 billion, settled for $24 million out of $4 billion, settled for $24 million. And as we speak right now, EOS is still listed on a massive number of exchanges. So it's just something.
I mean, you want to talk about misappropriation of funds. I think that the discussion around Block One and how they used the $4 billion is way more incriminating than anything that Richard Hart could have done.
Correct. So I think this is more blown.
I mean, they raised $4 billion. They built the blockchain, which cost them no more than $20 million at best. They bought a voice.com website for $20 or $30 million. And the rest of the money they basically used to create platforms that enrich the shareholders and don't enrich the token holders. So I mean, you want to talk about misappropriation of funds? I think the EOS case, the Block One case, is a slam dunk.
No, Rand. They bought Bitcoin. They're holding 140,000 Bitcoin, and they have a mining operation. Yeah,
exactly.
But there's no misappropriation of funds, Rand, when it comes to EOS, is there?
I mean, of course there is. They raised money in an ICO, which went on for a long time. They raised billions of dollars in an ICO, which was the biggest ICO of 2017. They took that money, and instead of spending it on an ecosystem to grow the EOS ecosystem and add value to the token holders, they literally went and invested that same money in things that enrich the shareholders of a centralized company. That if that's not misappropriation,
guys, we have this is the SEC's. Hold on, guys,
buying a
break.
diamond does not benefit shareholders.
Scott,
we just
Scott, we just got breaking news, man. We don't get too many breaking news. It's been a while. So 27 seconds ago, the SEC tweeted about this, and as we said, the SEC doesn't tweet about many. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we have a lawyer say the SEC doesn't tweet often when it comes to charges they file? Anyone?
They usually do that for big trophy cases. They don't do that for run-of-the-mill.
Cool. Well, they did this.
They do now.
Yeah,
they do now. All the crypto cases they do it. All the crypto cases.
Oh, okay, yeah, and the argument, I remember. The argument we were making is that they're trying to paint a picture in about crypto in a bad light. Today, so that was 27 seconds ago. That was 30 seconds ago. So a minute ago. Today we charged Richard Hart, aka Richard Schuler, and 3 unincorporated entities that he controls, Hex, Pulsechain, and Pulsex, with conducting unregistered offerings of crypto asset securities that raised more than $1 billion in crypto assets from investors. And there's a quote there that Eric Warmer, director of Fort Worth Regional Office, a quote they included. Hart called on investors to buy crypto asset securities and offerings that he failed to register. He then defrauded those investors by spending some of their crypto assets on exorbitant luxury goods. This action seeks to protect the investing public and hold Hart accountable for his actions.
See, that's not true because we all know how to read the blockchain, and you can see that during the Hex, everything with Hex they had to do, that wallet never sold a single Hex.
So real quick, this is wallet, right? This is what the SEC means.
It didn't have to sell the Hex.
Yeah, I got to run in 1 minute. But what the SEC means by that, so they're essentially saying 2 things. One is that this is an unregistered securities offering, which it seems like it obviously is, right? You look at Richard Hart's statements. His only kind of defense here was not acknowledging that it was him. But like this is sort of like the no homo theory of of SEC compliance. You don't get to just disclaim what you're actually doing and pretend it didn't happen. So no surprise that's not working. And then the defrauding investors part, right? So this is going to be the more controversial part of the case. What the SEC is saying is, all right, you've done this securities offering. And when you do a securities offering, you have to be straightforward about, I'm raising money from other people to build something so that everyone can profit. You need to be honest about what you're doing with the proceeds. And he made a bunch of statements about developing Pulsechain that the SEC is saying would lead the people who gave him money to reasonably believe that that money was being used for Pulsechain development. And instead, he was buying himself Lambos and diamonds and all sorts of other shit. And that's where the securities fraud charges come from.
I've got 2 other... So go ahead, Zach. So go ahead. Bruno, I'll just let Zach finish off.
I'm going to run in 30 seconds. Just 2 other things that are interesting about this case. One is that, these are unincorporated entities. So unlike, for example, the Ripple Labs case where Ripple Labs, the company, is being sued, because Richard Hart never incorporated Pulse or Pulsex or any of these things into a company, he's personally on the hook for this stuff. Another thing, this case is being brought in federal court in Brooklyn under a theory that they have venue here because Uniswap Labs is based in Brooklyn and Uniswap was used for these offerings. So that's something that has potential consequence for crypto cases down the road. So, I mean, look, I think he's an easy person to beat up on. I think the SEC is probably going to win this, but this case will also, like the Ripple case, have important consequences down the road.
I think that Richard Hart fights this till the end because, Richard Hart's a man of show and a man, he's out there and he's a man of, he wants to prove points. That's how he is. He's principled.
But he's a smart person, but his emotions are not. But I think his intelligence outweighs his emotions. He's relatively emotionally intelligent.
I think it's the other way around. I think it's the other way around. I think his emotions outweigh his intelligence. These are people that are addicted to attention. These are people that are addicted to being right. If you think about Richard Hart, the one thing is he always wants to show people how smart he is. He always wants to show people how right he is. Every time, I'm the smartest guy in the world. No one's as smart as me. I'm the smartest guy. I'm going to do things that no one else can do. I've interviewed him many, many, many times. And, whereas I'm not going to comment about whether I think Hex and Pulse are a scam. I do think that the one thing about Richard is he's very smart, but his emotions, his need to be accepted goes beyond his logic. I asked him on an interview, I said to him, why do you go around driving these fancy cars and walking around Louis Vuitton? And he said, it's not fair that people that have done less than me get noticed more than me. This is a guy who just wants attention. He wants to prove that he's right. He wants to prove that he's the smartest guy in the world.
All this could be a marketing strategy, and it seems to have worked well, flaunting his wealth.
Well, it has. It has
And
worked.
making statements, and then
very
even
well.
the statement he's made to you, I don't want people that have done less than me be more successful than me. Even that statement could be all of it being showmanship. Maybe he's played us all, and I wouldn't be surprised if he knew this is coming. He's planned for it accordingly, and I wouldn't be surprised if he chose his words carefully in interviews like the one he did with Tone, to make sure he doesn't slip up. But then I could be wrong. I don't know. His ego could make the most out of him. Moon, I'm not sure if you've met Richard and would like to get your thoughts. Do you think he will fight this till the end, or do you think he'll settle?
There's two things. I can only go off of history and based off of Rand said, and based what a lot of people think. I do think there are interviews out there where he speaks about, and I've watched pretty much all of his interviews and all of his live streams. He really likes the idea that EOS has settled, and it makes smart business decision for anyone to do that if they want to go that route. That's why I make that statement.
And Rand, and before you say, I know Moon, you have got more points to make. Rand, to add on to this, it could be a win as well. Like he could settle and say, hey, I raised $1 billion, paid 50 million or 10 million or 20 million to settle. Life is good. I won.
That's the game in the United States. That is the game that you play in the United States. It's actually it's unfortunate, but what it's come down to is that what's the risk return? And the risk return is you can raise X and you can pay a penalty of Y.
Correct.
Moon, I want to give you the mic back because I know you're saying, and I'm glad.
Guys, there's a huge difference between EOS and Hex. Several things. One, SEC knows they messed up in the EOS case, so that's not going to happen again. And two, I'm fully expecting criminal charges from the DOJ to come against Richard Hart. That did not happen in the EOS case against any of those guys, not Larimer, not the other guys involved.
There is the misappropriation of funds, which I think it's fraud. So I think it would be criminal. Gary, before I go back to Moon, it's been a while, man. Good to have you back, and I would like to get your thoughts before we go back to Moon because I interrupted him.
Hey guys, good to be in the space. I'm going to try and play relatively unbiased, although I have been around Richard since 2017. I've met him in person maybe 5 or 6 times and things like that. So, and then as far as like this idea of a community gravitating around a logo or an icon or geometry or something, I'm probably one of the more well-known. My opinions aren't about the product or any of these bits of code that we trade in the internet. I really don't want to say anything specific about that. I think there's plenty of content, maybe thousands of hours directly from Richard on his YouTube channel. So if anybody has questions about code, relate it to the philosophy that I think crypto tries to say that it's marketing. It tries to say that it's freedom to transact, choice, ungated environment, basically. And there's been a lot of content over the past 2 years, really from Richard, focusing on, if you don't have the freedom to transact, you do not have freedom of speech. You do not have freedom of movement. So I theorize about the personality of the man. And my theory, may play out well, it may play out poorly, is that he cannot beat the name of Satoshi, but he wants to. He cannot beat the name of Vitalik rolling off of the tip of the tongue by most of cryptocurrency, but he wants to. So I believe that his chase for glory, his want to be loved, his intellect and display, whether it was in battles, years ago, like the lawyer that was speaking earlier, that's where he was getting his validation then. And to me, it seems like if you have some rule set of what you want from a cryptocurrency, maybe it's the virgin birth of Bitcoin and the security structure around how that code works. Richard observed that. Richard was part of that. Everyone here acknowledges. And then if you see his videos from basically being upset over Bitcoin losing the plot 6 years or 7 years ago.
Gary, just going back to those charges, quick question. I want to get your thoughts on, for me, what I find to be the more serious charge. He's got 2 main charges. He's got, correct me if I'm wrong, or David Silver, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 2 main charges are offering unregistered securities and misappropriation of funds. That's a good way to summarize it. Okay, no one interrupted me, so I guess what about...
Part of the assumption is that
there's a third charge there, guys. There's 3, and the third one is more serious. It's fraud in connection with the sale of a security is one of the charges as well.
Fraud and what? Sorry,
So,
Jason.
so there's unlicensed sales, there's fraud in connection with the sale, and then there's the misappropriation, which effectively is theft, right? So the fraud in connection with the sale of a security carries felony charges with it. And so even though you know, just go back to what the caller was saying about before, that maybe you can't prove.
I don't know, Jason. I don't want to interrupt you. I'm trying to take notes as you speak, but it's the audio, you're in a car. Is there any chance to improve the audio? Is it possible?
I'm sorry, say again.
Is it possible to improve your audio? I know you're in a car, just so it's hard to piece together what you're saying.
Well, unfortunately, I'm in a small town on the coast of Texas right now, outside of Corpus Christi. So
okay, it's better. It's better. It's a bit better now. Go ahead.
Right. So what I was going to say is that with the fraud in connection with the sale of security, you do not actually have to show any possession or ownership or control of any of the money. That's where you have aider and abettor statutes. So this is where Richard's always had it wrong. He's always thought that if you couldn't show that he controlled the money or had the money, that he would somehow get away with this. But if you look at the cases of Steven Seagal and Mayfield and those guys that got nailed for promotional stuff, the same type of stuff can come down on Richard Hart as well, because no one can deny he was the #1 promoter of Hex. And if he told lies and people relied on those lies, that's fraud in connection with the sale of a security. And he can be held for that disgorgement, and he can be held for those criminal charges.
Yeah, but Jason, in those cases, the ones you mentioned, just playing devil's advocate, those guys all got slapped on the wrist, including Kim Kardashian. The SEC made their cute video, they moved on, and then you didn't really see criminal charges. But I mean, to that end, to what you're saying, I've been saying from the beginning, if he took, I don't care if you call them sacrificers, investors, unicorns, clown farts, it makes no fucking difference. It's ridiculous. If the guy took money from investors and then bought diamonds and cars with it,
but so what's the? But Scott, just to go back, yeah,
let me finish the point. So,
but before Gary, sorry, I'll give you the mic right after. Just want to understand the third charge before giving you the mic, Gary. Sorry to interrupt. But Scott, so what's the third one? Because unless the securities, okay, misappropriation of funds, okay.
Theft. It's effectively theft. The third charge, if I'm understanding what Jason said.
No, this is no theft. Theft is a misappropriation of funds. This is taking
Isn't that
funds.
The third one?
No, this is the two that I.
There's under securities laws, you have unlicensed, unregistered. That's one claim, and then you have fraud in connection with the sale. That's a completely different charge.
Okay, so what we don't know what the fraud is. We just know that one charge is fraud in connection with the sale of the security. And what is that fraud exactly? What did he do? He sold unlicensed.
The $12 million that they say he took and bought things to personally enrich his life, including the diamonds and cars.
No, there's that, but you can also look at, and it was discussed earlier, about the recycling. So if you manipulate markets in order to show that you have more volume than you actually do in order to induce a sale, that is fraud in connection with the sale of a security.
If you did what? Sorry, Jason. One more time. We'll go together.
It's similar to wash trading, but the fact that he was saying that he was putting money into the contract, claiming it was from other people, saying, "Here, look, there's more interest. Look at all these people that are sacrificing their funds," but it was really his own.
Okay. So
fraud and pumping interest.
Okay, now I understand. So it's fraud
That's
involved.
Alleged, by the way, I'm not.
Yeah, everything we talk is they're all.
Everyone's gonna jump up my ass, I'm sure, on Twitter, but I'm not saying he did these things. We're talking about what they're alleging.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, any hate related to this show always goes to Scott, just for the record. Other shows is different people.
DMs, but this, you guys check them.
Yeah. So Scott, just a quick question. Not quick question. So summarize. Essentially, anything related, if there's any fraudulent behavior related to the security offering itself, alleged security offering itself, that's what this particular charge is, and that charge is called fraud in connection with the sale of the security. And what you've explained it to the audience, Scott, is essentially him pumping money into the token, into the private round, and say, or even post listing, and say, hey, look at all these people buying the token. But and I'm guessing this is during the fundraise, not during post listing.
This is from the other guest. I was just summarizing.
You're summarizing. So okay, now you're avoiding. Stop hedging yourself, pussy. But what you're saying is that any.
Well, let me clear up a little bit more, right? Like a lot of Ethereum came in on day one. Now, obviously, Richard knows he needs to keep some of that Ethereum. That Ethereum did not stick around in that receiving account for very long. Now, then I'm sure he has a way of mixing that Ethereum. He was prepared. And a bunch of the Ethereum that came in went back into acquiring way more hex, especially when it crashed on that early day. So a lot of the stuff that Richard bought was from the hex that appreciated in value a little bit, because obviously he's not going to lock it up for himself. And it was from the Ethereum that came in from the initial sale. This is likely to be that recycling part that the SEC is talking about, where Richard used the Ethereum that came in to create more hex, and now he's pretending like that hex wasn't his. These were all of the people that got wealthy on hex, when in reality, a bunch of it was himself.
And I'm going to go to Gary now, but essentially what the strategy is here is that he'd be putting money into the fund, into the raise, saying, hey, all these people are investing, but it will just be him sending money to that wallet. Cool.
Yeah, so that's what we call a Ponzi scheme.
No, it's not. I wouldn't call it. But Jason, we wouldn't call that.
They're using new investor money to pay off original investors or something to go along. That's the definition of a Ponzi scheme.
Sorry, Jason, say that again. Say that the second sentence again.
Using new investor funds or funds from original investors to pay off.
But they're not making. But Jason, they're not. Yeah, but they're not making that allegation. What you said is he's investing into the private round. So he invested his own money into the private round to make it seem others are investing. So he's sending himself money to make it seem others are investing, just to create hype around the raise, which is I would look at as
not his money. Not his. Well, technically it's his money, but the money that initially came in from his stupid followers, he then used that money to pump up the token more, to pretend that more people are buying it than they originally
hold on. So, Ton, what he's saying is that people, let's say people put in 10 million, all right? And then what he'd use that 10 million or some of it, I'm just making numbers up, he'd use some of that money to send back to, but how people can easily see that money go away, they got mixed or something.
There's a lot of accusations going on. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, there's a lot of misleading.
It's not. I wouldn't say accusations. I would say I would say they are the charges. You were trying to make sense of charges. There used to be accusations, but now they're the SEC and the SEC. Just got to give you context, David. You probably know the exact number, but the hit rate, the success rate of the SEC in either settling or winning the case is pretty high. Like to have cases like the XRP where the SEC partially loses is not common. David, is that true?
100%. 90% success rate, and right now that number is going down, but historically, guys like me, and I apologize to John Deedon when he and I were going at this, I played the odds, and the odds are historically if you go up against the SEC or the federal prosecutors, you're gonna lose 95% of the time.
So to go back and Moon, I want to go to you after Gary, but just to kind of finalize this discussion about the third charge. So Tone, what you're saying is that I want to understand, and I'm going to move on. Is he using his own money to pretend to invest, to create hype so more people invest because they see a lot of money coming in? Or you're saying that he's using money that was already invested by people to mix it and again, we're just assuming here, to mix it and then reinvest it into the contract to make it seem that a lot of money is coming in? What is the...
I'm speculating that he was using the investor money for that.
Okay, which I don't know if he'd need to mix it for that because it's easy to track. And he has his own money to do that same thing. But either way, we understand that this is the charges that he's it's called fraud in connection with the sale of the security, which in this case, based on what we've read so far, it seems that he's used money to invest to make it seem more money's coming in to kind of create hype.
He doesn't have to mix it. Here's the thing, right? Remember, Richard is, as was said before, Richard is not a dumb guy. He is a pretty smart guy, and he understands how these Ethereum smart contracts work. So all he has to do is get a couple of rich Ethereum whales on board that also want to get rich, and get them to pledge additional Ethereum, and then he gives them that same amount of Ethereum back later through a smart contract using the Ethereum he originally received. So he doesn't actually need to mix it right away.
But that's not. But Tone, that makes sense. But except two reasons I find that to be not a good strategy. Number one is that smart contract would be on the blockchain. So that money, unless they use some anonymous wallet, he sends it to an anonymous wallet. But then the second issue with that is that he's creating more people. He's involving more people in his this fraudulent behavior, which means there's going to be more potential leaks. If he has his own money, and we know he's been early in Bitcoin, it's hard to dispute he doesn't have any money unless I'm uneducated there. So it just makes more sense to use his own money rather than involving other people.
So the timing of this is really interesting. And Richard, 5 or 6 years ago, when his content was first, talking about things outside of Bitcoin only, it's pretty amazing that this movie, The Highest of Stakes, releases in 40 different markets across the United States in like 3 days. That's the opening is in May or in Miami. A lot of celebrities and things like that come into that particular event. It's in all over the United States. And what I'm highlighting is that Richard seems to, at least on the surface, I don't know the guy, at his house or something, but like his desire to be loved more than Vitalik or Satoshi is pretty obvious. Like that's where he thinks his glory is. There's always going to be a richer guy than Richard. There's always going to be some genius in some other subset, that he's not an expert in some way. And I think his game theory, I want to be master, I want to be ruler, will go to court. Like I do think that these things will end up being in the public arena. The film crew that followed him for 2.5 years, they're 5-time Emmy winners. They've covered all kinds of things that are popular now in theaters, whether it's slave trade or, like the scandals of SBF or whatever it is. Like people are attracted to drama. And this is a very dramatic moment, 3 days basically before the opening of that movie in theaters. Right. So do I think that the SEC collaborated on the release time? No. Do I think that Richard always thought that he would be highlighted in this way? Yes, I do. I think that 2 years ago when he went through his I want to outrage people phase and all over Instagram and calling out people like Ben Baller and other people that are grifter, in my opinion, kinds of people. Like I think that he was wanting attention, of course, and to skyline himself in this way, to have gone through the context of the law. He's not a lawyer. He doesn't say he's a lawyer, but he engaged with these 4 guys, one of which is on stage today, 5 years ago. To think that he didn't anticipate that this would culminate.
No, he might have.
You can't bring Satoshi to stage. You can't
Gary,
bring through Foundation Vitalik to stage, but you can bring Richard to stage, and I think he wants that moment.
If you read through the actual complaint, I'm pretty happy about the complaint. This reads like, hey, you're loud and wear Gucci, and you owe us a fine. Like that's what it really reads like to me. A few of the things that jump out. One is a lot of that they got factually incorrect, which just seems par for the course. Like there's just a lot of misstatements. The other part is they mentioned the misallocation of funds around, it's 12 or 17 million. I can't remember the exact number. That's actually a good thing because that inadvertently says that a huge portion of this wasn't misused. So that means there's something that differentiates that percentage of the money, which may sound funny, but essentially all that argument will come down to the crux of like the languaging and how things were handled and what was a reasonable expectation beyond what was like physically written. So again, it really falls back to that sacrifice language. What was reasonable expectations, and even saying that it was misallocated. They have to really they have to show like misallocated how. Like did anyone expect that all that money was going to go somewhere and that it wasn't going to be used for any personal gain ever? That seems like an unreasonable expectation to me, right? So when you really again look through the language, I think the fact that they named Pulsex and Hex in there as well is actually good for the case because they basically just went after the brands, and the argument isn't really different, but the argument they have isn't really different between them. So again, if you read it in totality, it just kind of reads like, hey, we don't like this guy and we're pretty sure he did something somewhere and owes us the money.